Most people live their entire lives without ever questioning the nature of the reality around them. They assume that what they touch is real, what they see is truth, and what they experience through the senses is the only possible dimension. Hermetic philosophy disagrees. It claims that everything you perceive is part of a larger illusion, a mental projection. In other words, you are inside a simulation, a spiritual one. Hermeticism begins with a radical idea. The all is mind, the universe is mental. This is not metaphor. It means that existence itself is a thought, and you are a thought within a thought. You are not your body, not your name, not even your memories. You are the observer, the one aware of the simulation. This simulation is not made of code or computers. It is made of vibration, of frequency, of patterns. What you call the physical world is condensed thought. Energy slowed down to appear solid. Everything you interact with is built on mental scaffolding. So how did you get stuck? You agreed to play. According to Hermetic teachings, souls incarnate into simulated environments to grow, to experience contrast, and to remember what they truly are. But once inside, the mind forgets. It identifies with the avatar. The body becomes me, and the game becomes life. You are not in a trap. You are in a lesson. But like any lesson, you can repeat it forever if you don't wake up. The Matrix isn't just a film. It's an ancient metaphor. Plato called it the cave. The Gnostics called it the demiurge. The Hermetists called it Maya, illusion. Different names, same truth. Most people live inside a construct they believe is real. So what is the simulation? It's your beliefs, your conditioning, the story of who you think you are, the emotional loops you've never questioned. It's the job you hate but can't leave, the fear of what others will think, the inner voice that tells you you're not enough. These loops aren't natural, they're programmed. And Hermetics gives you the code to escape. The first step is to observe. You must become the watcher. The Hermetists taught that mind creates, but the higher mind observes without attachment. When you watch a thought instead of reacting to it, you begin to dissolve the code. Every pattern you repeat without awareness is a thread in the web. Every belief you inherit without examination is another layer of the simulation. But awareness cuts through illusion like a sword. The second step is vibration. Everything is frequency. According to the principle of vibration, nothing rests. Everything moves. The lower your emotional frequency, fear, guilt, shame, the deeper you're stuck in the denser levels of the simulation. The higher your state, clarity, presence, love, the more you rise above the code. But don't confuse high vibration with false positivity. Hermetics is not about pretending everything is fine. It's about alignment. Purity of thought, precision of will. You change the simulation not by force, but by frequency. The third step is polarity. Light and dark, left and right, masculine and feminine. The principle of polarity states that all opposites are the same in nature, differing only in degree. Fear and courage are the same energy, polarized. So are ignorance and wisdom, victimhood and sovereignty. When you understand polarity, you stop resisting. You transmute. That's how you escape. Not by running, but by transforming the code within you. The fourth step is rhythm. The simulation works in cycles, waves, ups and downs, expansion and contraction. If you don't understand rhythm, you'll always be reactive. You'll think you're failing when in truth you're simply at the bottom of a wave. The Hermetic path is not straight, it's spiral. The fifth step is cause and effect. Most people are effects. They're pushed around by outer forces, by emotion, by programming. But Hermetics teaches you to become the cause, to initiate rather than react, to create rather than consume. This requires power, but not domination, inner mastery. The sixth step is gender. the balancing of receptive and projective forces. Within every mind is both potential and action. To escape the simulation, you must unify them. You must think clearly and act boldly. The seventh step is correspondence. As above, so below. As within, so without. This is the master key. The world you live in is not happening to you. It is happening through you. You are the projector, not the screen. So how do you escape? You stop playing by rules you never agreed to. You question every assumption, every role, every belief. You meditate not to feel good, but to observe the operating system from the outside. You fast, not to lose weight, but to reset your frequency. You speak less because silence sharpens awareness. You breathe with intention because breath is the bridge between dimensions. You remember who you are, a consciousness temporarily embodied. The moment you stop reacting to the simulation, it starts losing control over you. The moment you stop fearing death, the simulation loses its strongest hold. The moment you stop chasing validation, the simulation collapses. You're not here to escape life. You're here to master it, to walk through the illusion like a lucid dreamer, to play but not to forget, to create, not to be controlled. You are not stuck. You are simply asleep. Wake up. Once you start to wake up, the simulation will push back. Not because it is evil, but because it is structured. It is an intelligent feedback system that rewards unconsciousness and resists deviation. You've lived inside it for so long that it feels natural. But the moment you begin to act from pure awareness, patterns break, and resistance rises. The Hermetists knew this. They called it inertia, the momentum of illusion. It's the gravity that keeps souls locked into predictable loops. They taught that escaping the simulation would require not only clarity but also friction. Real change always generates pressure. The deeper the sleep, the louder the alarm must be. The first sign you're leaving the simulation is discomfort. Old habits no longer feel right. You can't pretend anymore. Conversations feel artificial. Systems that once seemed powerful now look hollow. You stop resonating with noise. This is not a crisis, it's a calibration. Your environment will often resist your awakening. Friends will say you're changing. Family might feel uncomfortable. Even your body may rebel at first. Because every system seeks balance, even if that balance is toxic. This is not a failure, it's a signal. Your vibration is shifting. Hermeticism teaches that the world is mental. And when your mental field changes, reality must reconfigure to match it. But during that reconfiguration, the old simulation fights to stay alive. This is why ancient initiations involved solitude, silence, and disconnection from the tribe. Not because separation is noble, but because you must unplug to reprogram. You can't heal in the same loop that broke you. You must become the glitch. The simulation thrives on predictability. It wants you in a rhythm. Wake up, consume, obey, doubt yourself, repeat. It doesn't care if you're successful. It cares that you stay inside its bandwidth. And the moment you choose something different, stillness, truth, presence, you become unpredictable. And that's when it notices. You start to see behind the veil. You notice how most conversations are scripts, how most desires were implanted, how even your thoughts aren't truly yours. They're echoes from culture, trauma, and repetition. The Hermetic student learns to withdraw energy from false identities, to stop feeding the simulation with unconscious attention. Because attention is currency. Where your focus goes, reality grows. This is why practices like meditation are not just spiritual fluff. They are code disruptors. They break the loop. They slow the machine. They create stillness. And in that stillness, the soul returns. You realize you don't need more information. You need less noise. You don't need more stimulation. You need more silence. You don't need more answers. You need better questions. The simulation is clever. It mimics spiritual progress with complexity. It drowns you in content, doctrines, ritual, until you forget the goal: freedom. But the Hermetic path is simple. Be still. Be aware. Be honest. Simplicity breaks the illusion. Complexity feeds it. You don't need to escape the system. You need to exit the internal agreement that the system defines your reality. This is the true Hermetic rebellion. Not external revolution, but inner sovereignty. The simulation loses power the moment you see it. You begin to move through the world like a ghost with fire inside. You smile not because you're fake, but because you're free. You engage, but you're not attached. You create, but you don't cling. You're no longer hypnotized by form. You feel the vibration behind the mask. You begin to see others not as avatars, but as sparks, some asleep, some flickering, some ablaze. And you feel compassion, not pity, but clarity, because you were once asleep too. You know what it's like to forget, so you don't preach. You embody, you become a living code. And that's what the simulation can't touch: authenticity. You don't argue with noise. You silence it. You don't prove the truth. You live it. You don't destroy the simulation. You transcend it. Every thought, every action, every breath becomes sacred code. You don't exit with a bang. You exit with a whisper, a single moment of presence. And you're outside the loop. And in that space, you remember, to truly exit the simulation, you must understand what keeps you in it. It's not the government, the media, or even technology. It's the stories you believe about yourself. These stories are the core software of your experience, the hidden architecture that constructs your world. Hermetics teaches that all reality is shaped by mental substance, and your personal version of the simulation is built entirely on your internal narrative. Change the story and you change the simulation, not symbolically, literally. The story that you're not enough, that's a prison. The story that you must be accepted to be valuable, that's a loop. The story that you are only what others see, that's the glitch. You exit by deleting the false programs. But here's the hard truth. Most people don't want to exit. They want comfort. They want control. They want the illusion to adjust, not to dissolve. And the simulation gives them that. Soft cages made of routine and reward. True freedom is uncomfortable at first. It demands that you give up who you thought you were. And for the ego, that feels like death. But for the soul, it's resurrection. You are not the name, the job, the status, the traumas, or even the successes. You are the awareness underneath. And that awareness doesn't play by the simulation's rules. Most systems are built to reinforce your identity, to keep you invested in your character. Schools, religions, politics, even relationships. They reflect your current code back to you. Not because they're malicious, but because that's what simulations do. To exit, you must stop playing the character and become the observer of the actor. This is the great work the Hermetists spoke of. Not some alchemical gold, but transmuting self-illusion into self-realization. And how do you do that? You begin to notice the loops. You see how every time someone criticizes you, you shrink. That's code. You see how you crave validation? That's code. You see how you self-sabotage just before growth? More code. Then you interrupt it. You breathe instead of react. You remain still instead of defending. You observe instead of collapsing. The more you witness without judgment, the more the code dissolves. Because the simulation cannot survive observation. It depends on identification. You begin to see the simulation everywhere. In language, in symbols, in architecture. You notice how society runs on fear and scarcity. How everything is marketed as not enough. How every system asks for your energy but offers no presence. The Hermetists taught that the outer world is the mirror of the inner kingdom. If your simulation is chaotic, so is your mind. If your life is heavy, your energy is cluttered. You cleanse not by changing the world, but by clarifying your vibration. Your environment begins to shift. Old habits fall away, people leave, new energies enter. The simulation responds because you are no longer in unconscious contract with it. You are starting to code consciously. Now your words have power. Now your silence has weight. Now your presence bends the pattern. You begin to live as if the game was optional. Because it is. You do what's aligned, not what's expected. You value truth over approval. You prioritize frequency over form. And slowly, layer by layer, the illusion peels back. You wake up and the day feels lighter. You walk into a room and feel the distortion. You listen to people and hear the programs beneath their voice. You dream more vividly. You feel déjà vu more often. You know when something is off, even if it looks perfect. These are signs, not that you're special, but that you're remembering. Hermetic mastery is not mystical. It's practical. It's how you show up, how you speak, how you hold your field, how you choose. When you truly exit, nothing outside you changes, but everything inside shifts. And that shift begins to rewrite your entire world. You realize you were never trapped. You were just hypnotized. Now you're lucid. Now you're free. When you exit the simulation internally, the world doesn't disappear. It reshapes. You're still in the same environment, but it no longer defines you. You begin to move differently, speak differently, think differently, because now you're not reacting, you're directing. Most people are predictable. The simulation counts on that. It anticipates your reactions, your fears, your emotional loops. That's how it maintains its illusion of control. But once you stop reacting automatically, you collapse the timeline it prepared for you. The Hermetists understood this as mental causation. If everything is mind, then every event begins in thought. But most thoughts are recycled. They're not new. They're echoes from the collective unconscious, family patterns, cultural scripts. They're not yours. And the more you wake up, the more you realize how much of you was just borrowed code. Your preferences, your fears, even your goals, inherited, absorbed, rewarded, never chosen. So what happens when you stop running that code? Silence, space, a feeling of now what? That's the void. And most people fear it, but the Hermetic path begins there. Where identity ends and truth begins. The void is not emptiness, it's potential. The field between simulations, the moment between thoughts, the breath between identities. In that gap, your soul speaks, but it doesn't use words. It uses vibration, sensation, alignment. This is why ancient initiates were trained in stillness, in fasting, in solitude. These weren't punishments. They were protocols to exit identity and re-enter source. You begin to notice what is you and what is just noise. You realize that stillness isn't passive, it's powerful. It recalibrates your signal. And when your signal is clean, you begin to broadcast your own reality. This is the true exit, not physical escape, but energetic authorship. You become the writer of your reality, not the actor in someone else's script. Hermetics never promised comfort. It promised clarity. And with clarity comes responsibility. To no longer feed the system that once enslaved you. To speak what's real, to move from presence, to reject the false even when it's convenient. You will be tested, not by gods, but by the patterns you used to serve. They will return. In temptation, in conflict, in doubt. The simulation will whisper, "Come back. It's easier here." And it is easier. But it's not alive. To live awake is to choose truth over comfort, awareness over numbness, energy over sedation. You begin to walk through the world as an anomaly. Not rebellious, not aggressive, just untouchable. Because nothing owns you anymore. Not your history, not your trauma. not your reputation. You've seen through the screen. And now, every moment is a portal. Every choice opens or closes a timeline. Every thought carries a frequency. Every emotion leaves a trail. You begin to care not just what you do, but where your actions lead you vibrationally. This is soul technology. The Hermetists weren't priests. They were engineers of the unseen. They mapped the invisible laws of consciousness and handed down the tools, not to escape life, but to sculpt it from the inside. You learn to reverse the flow. Instead of reacting to the simulation, you start to write into it. Instead of asking, "What should I do?" you ask, "What do I choose to create?" And you create not with effort, but with coherence. When you speak aligned with soul, reality moves. When you act from presence, doors appear. When you detach from form, new forms arrive. This isn't magic. It's physics, inner physics. The field around you is always listening, but now you're transmitting something it can respond to. Not noise, not confusion, clarity, direction, command. You stop seeking exit because you realize the exit was always within. You were the key. You were the lock. You were the gate. Now walk through. At this stage, you're no longer trying to escape the simulation. You're learning to move through it like a lucid navigator. You begin to use the laws consciously, not as beliefs, but as instruments. This is when Hermetic principles stop being philosophy and become functionality. The principle of mentalism now lives in your daily awareness. You see thought not as noise, but as architecture. You understand that every thought plants a seed, and seeds become structures. If you repeat a thought enough times, the simulation wraps itself around it and gives it form. So you become deliberate. You no longer allow random thoughts to run your life. You guard your mental space like sacred ground. You treat focus like energy, because it is. You choose your words carefully, not to please, not to persuade, but to cast clean signals into the field. Hermetists believed that every word was vibration, and vibration becomes matter. Your speech is spell work. When you speak fear, the simulation rearranges to confirm it. When you speak truth, the simulation either resists or transforms. Either way, you move the code. The principle of correspondence sharpens your inner eye. As above, so below. As within, so without. You begin to read the outside world as a mirror, not literally, energetically. A strange delay in your plans reflects inner resistance. A repeated conflict reveals an unresolved loop. You no longer blame. You decode. Life becomes a feedback system. You observe without self-judgment. The moment you get triggered, you pause. Because you know the simulation thrives on unconscious reactivity. But when you pause, you reclaim authorship. The principle of vibration becomes a compass. You walk into a space and feel whether the frequency supports you or not. You don't force yourself to stay where your light dims. You don't push where resonance is gone. Instead, you tune your field and choose alignment over approval. Even relationships shift. You stop chasing connection. You attract those who already match your frequency. The simulation reorganizes your world based on your new signal. The principle of polarity becomes a tool of transmutation. You no longer see emotions as problems. You see them as energy in motion. Anger becomes power. Sadness becomes depth. Fear becomes clarity. You don't suppress polarity. You alchemize it. The principle of rhythm teaches you patience. You stop fighting the ebb. You use the down cycles for stillness, integration, healing. You stop rushing. You trust the current. You remember that movement is fractal, not linear. The principle of cause and effect empowers you. You're no longer surprised by outcomes. You see how you created them. You trace everything back to thought, to state, to choice. You step out of reaction and into design. This is where magic begins. But it's not theatrical. It's quiet, clean, direct. You think, and life responds. You feel, and doors open or close. You choose, and timelines bend. The principle of gender becomes internal balance. You unite focus and flow, will and receptivity, logic and intuition. You are no longer fragmented. You are whole, and wholeness is magnetic. Now the simulation becomes pliable, not because you're escaping it, but because you're vibrating above it. You become in the world, but not of it. This is the Hermetic paradox. You remain grounded in the body, yet anchored in spirit. You eat, speak, work, but from presence, from consciousness, from truth. You don't float, you don't retreat. You enter the world as a sovereign. And sovereignty is what the simulation fears most. Because a sovereign cannot be manipulated, sold, or controlled, you realize the greatest rebellion is stillness. The greatest power is clarity. The greatest exit is embodiment. You no longer fear the code. You write into it. You don't fight the system. You evolve beyond it. You don't preach awakening. You radiate it. And others feel it. Some are triggered. Some are curious. Some begin to awaken just by being around you. Because your field speaks louder than your words. Now you understand the deeper truth. You never had to destroy the simulation. You just had to remember you're not a product of it. You are not the program. You are the programmer. You've seen the illusion. You've stepped beyond the loops. You've remembered your power. Now comes the real test. Can you remain awake inside the dream? Because escaping the simulation isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice. A breath-by-breath discipline. The simulation doesn't vanish. It adapts. It evolves with you. It offers more complex distractions, more subtle deceptions. The deeper you go, the trickier the illusion becomes, but now you know the terrain. You know that attention is creation, that fear is frequency, that thought is architecture. You no longer play blindly. You are intentional. Hermetic mastery isn't about controlling the world. It's about mastering your relationship to it. Nothing owns your mind. Nothing owns your time. Nothing owns your energy. You're not rejecting reality. You're refining it. You begin to design your days like rituals. Every action becomes encoded with meaning. Every breath becomes aligned with intention. You don't wait for inspiration. You generate it. You move slower, not out of laziness, but out of presence. You speak less, not out of shyness, but out of precision. You create more, not out of ambition, but out of overflow. You understand that your inner state is the seed of your outer world, that peace is a technology, that coherence is power. The simulation still surrounds you. News cycles, digital distractions, collective fear. But you don't feed it. You observe. You stay centered. You respond from soul, not ego. And from that center, you begin to build. You build conversations that awaken. You build spaces that nourish. You build choices that liberate. You embody truth, not as theory, but as frequency. This is what the Hermetists meant by the great work. It's not about retreating into caves or chasing enlightenment. It's about becoming the link between spirit and form, the bridge between heaven and earth. You become the lucid dreamer who realizes the point isn't to escape. It's to awaken inside the dream and then reshape it. You realize Earth is not a prison. It's a classroom. The simulation is not your enemy. It's your mirror. You don't need to run. You need to see. Because once you see, you no longer react. Once you see, you no longer chase. Once you see, you no longer forget. You live with discipline, not rigidity, but devotion. You protect your energy not out of fear, but because you now understand its value. You walk the world like a silent storm, calm, focused, alive. You start to attract others who carry similar codes. The simulation begins to bend, not for power, but for harmony. You begin to feel timelines collapse and reassemble around you. The right people show up, the wrong ones dissolve. Opportunities arise not from striving, but from resonance. You no longer need to prove. You no longer need to explain. You simply walk, and reality reorganizes. This is the Hermetic exit, not escape, but elevation. You rise beyond the game by mastering the player. You build a life from clarity. You speak from alignment. You act from essence. And one day you realize that you haven't just exited the simulation. You've rewritten it. You've turned the dream lucid. And now, the real work begins.